The floor in the studio where I am and where Michael Borky is and where Brian Haydad is, it is firm. We have no carpet pieces that are sliding out of the way as we walk in. It is all good. We are on stable ground as we begin Sports Talk Mississippi this afternoon.
Hold on. Before we continue, I think this conversation needs a little bit of theme music.
There we go. Slip and slide at the ballpark last night. In the infield, trying to make hard turns at first or third. It was an issue. And despite what maybe some social media platforms and people want you to believe, it wasn't an issue for just one team. I don't think that there was a team that was trying to get out of playing the final 5 innings of the game because they trailed by 1 in the fourth. I don't think that was the case. What a mess last night.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. Look, here's the deal. Because I had a little bit of time last night. I was put the little guy down, and I was frustrated because we had an accident, and he's too smart to have those now, and he had one, and I finally got him down, and I was on Twitter, and the stuff that people
don't worry about it, man. Hey, Dad had an accident like 3 days ago. It's okay.
But, so I got to see all of the
Sorry. I don't even know why I thought that was so funny.
Hey, that thinks it's funny.
That's funny.
But I saw all of the stuff that you're talking about, the irrational discourse of the internet. But let's play this out for a second. So, regardless of the fact that it was not a game at Swayze Field and not a game in which Ole Miss was the home team, regardless of the fact that it was a Sun Belt umpiring crew, regardless of the fact that, unless, Richard, you understand it differently, there was a conversation had earlier in the game with both dugouts from the umpire crew saying, hey, I don't like what I see here. This isn't good, and we're going to convene soon and figure out if we should keep playing. Regardless of that conversation happening, regardless of multiple players slipping when trying to round first or third base, regardless of the fact that an Ole Miss pitcher took up, squares of not embedded sod when he was trying to run to field a bunt, which could have really hurt himself on that, regardless of what happened with Louisiana Tech and what Lane Burroughs said and the outcome of that game, regardless of your allegiance as a fan, every take that you could have about that went out the window when Scott Berry last night said what he said after the game. The field's not playable. It is not worth continuing this game. It was going to get bad. We mutually agreed to end it right when we did. That field is not safe for play. It was unplayable. We're not going to play this game anymore. Richard, you know Scott Berry a lot better than I do, but from what I understand about him, on top of the fact that he's all class, like the way he compare the way he conducted himself last night to the way Lane Burroughs conducted himself after that, Scott Berry's all class. But one thing he's not is a chump. He's not a wuss. If Scott Berry felt like his team was wronged last night, we would know. He would have let people know. There's no way that he would have just laid down and taken being wronged unless he agreed with the decision that was made. So all this stuff that was said last night, unless you're calling Scott Berry soft, unless you think that Scott Berry was also complicit in the aiding of Ole Miss being scared of a team that they beat 15-0 in a super regional on the road last year, regardless of all of that, Scott Berry ended any take that you could have by saying what he said last night after the game. He did.
What did Scott Berry say after the game last night? Well, here's some of it.
Talked to Bianco, he said, look, you guys came to agreement. He doesn't see that. Yeah, it's probably not going to happen tonight.
Yeah, I mean, you could tell that as the game went along, and
rounding there at first base, and then they were blowing out over there. Blew out a little bit here at third, and but the last play there, when Edsel dropped the bunt, their pitcher tried to get off to field it, and he pushed about 2 or 3 pieces of sod out. It was pretty evident that this thing could get pretty bad. We both have a lot of season left and certainly don't need to get somebody hurt because of that.
So that was Scott Berry after last night's game being interviewed by local media. I got to tell you, I always am amazed when we watch a Super Bowl or a national championship game in particular. If you have a national championship game on a field that is also an NFL field or also has had a bowl game or multiple bowl games, where they come in and they tear out the sod and they replace it, and like 3 days later they play on it. And sometimes they have field positions, but they have field condition issues. But by and large, those fields hold up. I don't know how they do that. I don't know if they've got like the world's biggest sewing machine that I've just never seen before, where they sew the grass into place. But if you've ever put sod down in your yard, I don't know if you guys have done that, whether you've sodded an entire yard or helped somebody else do it, and it doesn't really matter whether it's rolls or squares or whatever. You know that, okay, if the sod is dry and you've got a dry surface when you put it in, you can kind of put it in place and it'll basically stay. But once it gets wet, that stuff starts sliding all over the place, and you just want to stay off of it for a couple of weeks. So apparently they sodded the field a week or so ago. It's been really wet in the Jackson metro area for the last month. And you haven't had like
spots too.
Yeah, you haven't had a ton of sunshine and warm weather to really promote that root growth where it'll dig down into the soil and take root and stay put. And so you had a mess last night.
Yeah, there was in hindsight, they probably wish they hadn't tweeted it, but 2 weeks ago they did share a picture of the field being prepped for sod to be laid down just 2 weeks ago.
Well, and look, a week from Friday night, the Mississippi Braves play their season opener at home against the Biloxi Shuckers. They got a lot of work to do between now and then. A lot of work to do between now and then. Yeah. Ole Miss and Mississippi State are supposed to play on that field in, about a month? Maybe a hair under a month? Which should be plenty of time for the grass to grow in. But that's a tough look last night for the stadium, to some degree for the Braves organization. And it's frustrating. Right? It's frustrating for the teams who traveled on a weekday, either up from Hattiesburg or down from Oxford, on a bus, whole deal. It's an expensive thing. And then it's really frustrating for the fans. As college baseball goes, that's a pretty expensive ticket. Ticket prices that range from, $25 to $75 for the game. And if you happen to be one of the people that buys a suite for that game, you've got a whole lot more invested in that. And for your trouble, the Mississippi Braves have kindly offered to trade the ticket that you bought last night for a couple of Mississippi Braves tickets down the line at a time that is convenient for you. That, by the way, has not set well with the fans who did make the trip. We'll talk more about this. What does this mean going forward for baseball in and around the capital city? We'll get that there was some frustration among some fans whose financial recourse for a pretty significant outlay last night was that they could exchange one ticket from last night's game for 2 Mississippi Braves tickets at a future date. Not a lot of people real happy about that. I may have to edit some of these responses, like this one from Mike. He says, forget that. I want my money back. I'm not driving 5 hours to watch a team I care nothing about. Talking about the round trip.
Yeah, I mean that's a bad decision, man. Look, I love going to those games. I'm excited to take my son to those games. I mean, they start next weekend. I'm going to take him. I think Saturday is the plan. I can't wait. I love going there. Don't get me wrong. It's not the same.
Tyler in Foxworth said, I paid $250 for me, my son, and 2 friends to go to the game. What a joke. 2 Mississippi Braves tickets. And that's not, nobody's taking a shot at the Mississippi Braves.
No.
You were going to watch college baseball, an event.
When an event gets canceled, you refund the price of the ticket. That's just how it's always worked in life. I'm really surprised. And I won't be surprised if they have to come back and say, okay, we're going to offer free refunds, because they've got to be, their phones have got to be ringing off the hook today with people just incensed at them.
Yeah. No, Mike says he paid $75 for his seat. He had one down close, front row seat for Mike. Somebody says, I made the trip, feeling cheated on this deal.
You should.
Hunter suggests that perhaps they, instead of offering an exchange for Braves tickets, they should at least offer tickets to the Governor's Cup. He said, now that wouldn't help Southern Miss fans who don't care about the Governor's Cup, but the Ole Miss fans would rather have that than a Braves ticket. The problem is they're selling that. They sell the heck out. They sell 8,000 tickets to the Governor's Cup. Here's the quandary in this thing. I don't know if people know this or not. The teams are guaranteed money to come play in this event, right? Southern Miss gives up a home game. Ole Miss gives up a home game. They rotate a home. It's a home and home every year that they play, but the second game of the year is always in Pearl. Southern Miss plays Mississippi State in Pearl. Ole Miss and Mississippi State play each other in Pearl. It's part of a series of games. And there's a guarantee that goes to the university. Well, the teams are still going to get paid, right? Southern Miss got on a bus. They drove from Hattiesburg to Pearl. Ole Miss got on a bus. They drove to – they were there to play the game. They are going to be paid the guarantee that they were given. Where does that guarantee come from? Ticket sales. Now, how they work all that out, I don't know. Hey, Dad, here's a question, though. We've been playing college baseball in and around the capital city for a long time, right? Mayor's Trophy game turned into the Governor's Cup, multiple stadiums. There is, without question, and by the way, once it moved to Pearl, that's when Southern Miss really got involved in kind of playing games there as well. Southern Miss played games in Jackson for years and years. The Jackson metro area is a massive alumni base for all 3 schools. And so there is value in bringing your product to Central Mississippi to make it easy on those fans. It's almost in some ways like a reward for the fans. It's more of a reward for the fans than it is for the teams who have to travel to play in these games. Is there enough value in bringing your product to the fans in Central Mississippi? And this isn't just about a SOD issue last night that caused a no contest. It's a bigger conversation. Is there enough value in taking your team to your fans in Central Mississippi to justify continuing to do this?
I mean, I don't know. I know that this is not the first time there have been complaints just about everything going on there at that particular stadium. I know that year in, year out, there's a lot of complaints about concessions. That, if you go to get a beer in the second inning, you might be back in your seat by the fifth inning. And, of course, the price of the tickets. I mean, that's not – Mike said $75 for a college baseball ticket. I mean, that's expensive.
Yeah.
And when you think that, every game is televised. I mean, back in those days, if you lived in Central Mississippi and you didn't want to go up to Starkville or Oxford, the Mayor's Trophy was the only chance you really had to, actually see your team play. Now every game is televised. I can just watch them whenever I want. And it's just, it's easier to get to Starkville now than it was 20 years ago. It's easier to get to Oxford now than it was 20 years ago. They finally finished Highway 49, so it's easier to get to Hattiesburg than it ever was. I mean, so to answer your question, I don't know that there is, to be honest with you. And I have some of the same questions about State. They play a basketball game every year at the Mississippi Coliseum, and I'm just like, that is an outdated and kind of, archaic arena, why do you continue to do that? It's not that big a deal to come to Starkville anymore, to me.
Yeah. There have been a lot of people that have thrown out the idea of, we'll go play a game in Biloxi, play it on the coast. And I suppose there's something to that. I mean, Mississippi State certainly has had some success playing a couple of midweek games on the coast in recent years. It's a long way, though. Now, you got a bunch of Mississippi State fans, Ole Miss fans, Southern Miss fans on the coast that don't make it to Oxford or Starkville as often as they would like because it's a long trip. So maybe the coast piece of it is a debate for another day. Here's what I'm curious about, though, specifically as it pertains to Ole Miss and Mississippi State. And I'm curious what you think about this on the C Spire text line. 601-879-4395. I don't know, Borky, maybe we can make a poll out of this as well.
Well, Elon's about to ruin polls for everybody, so we got to get him in while we can.
Well, we'll have write-in polls going forward.
Yep.
So, question is this. Ole Miss, Mississippi State. Obviously, you rotate where the series, the weekend series, the conference series is played each year, and you play the midweek game in Jackson, Pearl. Would fans be better served if, and let's just use this year as an example, Mississippi State hosts Ole Miss on Super Bulldog weekend? Would fans be better served if on the first Tuesday night or the last Tuesday night in April, the fourth game of the year was played in Oxford? So Tuesday night, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Swayze Field, a couple of weeks after you've played a 3-game series in Starkville. Or you move it around on the schedule, whatever. I'm just using last Tuesday in April as an example. And then next year, when Ole Miss hosts the 3-game regular season conference series, play a Tuesday night, midweek game in Starkville, Ole Miss, Mississippi State. Would that make more sense at this point than
I'm not
playing
mad
a game in Central Mississippi?
I'm not mad at that idea. I think it's doable. And I think you could just, if you're USM and Ole Miss, who, they play twice a year, State only plays USM the one time. I guess you could alternate that game every other year for State, and then for Ole Miss, you could do 2 a year, or you could split them. You could have a game where Ole Miss goes to Hattiesburg and then USM comes to Oxford. I had the idea earlier of maybe like early in the season, down in Biloxi, you have a little round robin, and you have, State and Ole Miss and Southern, and they all play each other Fridays. State, Ole Miss on Friday, Ole Miss, Southern on Saturday, State, Southern on Sunday, and you make a big weekend out of it. I think that would be a huge thing. I think people would go to that. So you got a lot of options, and that's the thing. That if you're running Trustmark Park and you're there in Pearl, you got to realize there are options out there, and there are ways to get around having to play at a facility that you don't feel is up to your standards.
Yeah. And it's really been cool. After the Ole Miss Southern Miss game was no longer a thing last night, I flipped on SEC Network, and Texas and A&M were playing each other in a midweek game at Bluebell Park in College Station, and there were 8,000 people there. And it looked awesome. I just thought, you're going to play the 3-game series. If there's a fourth game, what if you just rotated it between campuses? 10,000 on a Tuesday night in Starkville would be cool. And that's what you would have. 10,000 at Swayze on a Tuesday night in April would be really cool.
That only solves the Ole Miss and State game, though. It's a good idea.
That's what Haydad was saying a second ago. Right. So Ole Miss and Southern play each other twice. Just play it a Tuesday, Wednesday in Hattiesburg one year, Tuesday, Wednesday in Oxford the next year. Or split the 2 games. Play a Tuesday in Oxford and a Tuesday in Hattiesburg.
I do like the throwing the bone to the fans that aren't nearby thing, though. I would like for that to continue. But with what happened last night, I don't know if the present venue is an ideal spot anymore. But
and look, in fairness, and I'm sorry for interrupting, that's been a good facility. And it's provided a really cool atmosphere with great crowds for these games for a long time. Just last night was a bad look. I'm sorry for interrupting you, boy.
And the crowd wasn't good either.
No. On the Florida Gulf Coast, so I love Mississippi State baseball games in Biloxi. So there's a vote for State to continue to play games on the Gulf Coast. Somebody else says, yes, please, do an early season tournament in Biloxi with 4 teams, Ole Miss State, Southern Miss, and then South Alabama or LSU or someone along those lines, they suggest. I would rather go to Oxford or Starkville to watch these teams play than Jackson, and Jackson is closer to me than either place. Somebody suggests there's more incentive to go to a game on the coast as opposed to Jackson.
We do often hear from our people on the coast. I've got a couple friends that live down there too, and it's the distance that's the easy answer, but they do feel kind of disconnected from the school, and because they're very far away. I mean, Biloxi, Ocean Springs, past Christian, all that are closer to Baton Rouge than they are Oxford and Starkville, but there are a ton of Ole Miss and State fans down there.
Yeah.
That just don't get to see their team because it's really far away. I think throwing them a bone, aside from like the coaches speaking tour, would be a lucrative idea.
Could be.
We saw the crowds a couple weeks ago. It's a State fan base that's not real thrilled with the current state of their baseball program, but they put butts in seats when they played a couple midweek games down there.
I think Ole Miss has only played one game in Biloxi in the new stadium there. A few years ago, midweek game. Hunter says the idea of playing the games on campus is fine. Jackson is fine. Either way would be okay with me. I've enjoyed my trips to Pearl, but obviously I love home games. Says I'm more worried about the product on the field than where they play. It's unacceptable for State to be this bad. Ole Miss isn't great either. When does the seat get hot for these coaches? So Hunter going an entirely different direction with that. And then somebody said, no, Central Mississippi wants to see the Bulldogs and the Rebels.
I believe that, and I know they do. It's just what happened last night's unacceptable. You can't have that happen. It's so funny, the difference in tone from our text line versus social media last night. It's incredible. Social media is a horrible mistake in hindsight, but you can't have that. Could you imagine if when TJ McCants was rounding third, that slip was a little bit further and he tore a ligament in his ankle and he was out for a few weeks? That's what we're talking about here. What happened that ended the game, that wasn't just a pitcher slipping. That was the field. That was like, my son loves to put on socks and run on our hardwood and like hockey stop. He loves that. But one time,
it's a very risky business of him.
Oh, I know. He loves it.
It can be, yes.
But there was one time where he hockey stopped on the corner of our rug in the living room, and guess what that rug did? Went right out under his feet, and he fell, and he hit just on top of his eye, and he cried, poor guy. But that's what happened to the pitcher last night. He hockey stopped on a rug, and it just right out from under him. That wasn't him slipping. He wasn't stumbling. He wasn't falling. The grass went a square of sod came up.
We missed an opportunity. We just missed an opportunity, Borky. There was a music bed right there. I feel the earth move under my feet. We should have been.
I know that's not typical. That's not how it usually goes. But when you replace turf a week before a game has to be played and it ends up like that, then high-level college no level of athletes should have to play on something like that, but especially high-level college baseball. They are lucky that somebody didn't really hurt themselves last night. They are really. Scott Barry said it best. It was getting close to being really ugly if they'd have kept playing that game.
And look, if we're just going to be real about this thing, it's great for fans. It's great for fans in the central part of the state or in the southern part of the state if you're talking about playing in Biloxi. But this does way more for Jackson Metro or the coast than it does for the schools. And so it's got to be worthwhile for the schools to engage in this. And financially, it has been worthwhile. We're kind of talking about two different things, but when the Mayor's Trophy started like 40 years ago, college baseball wasn't then what it is today. Dudy Noble was not, I mean, you couldn't have imagined what Dudy Noble would look like in 2023 when the Mayor's Cup began. Mayor's Trophy game. You couldn't have imagined what Swayze would look like today, or for that matter, what Pete Taylor Park looks like today when these games were begun in Jackson. So we continue to do them because they've been done and they're fun and there's some history there and all of those things. But it has to be rewarding for the schools. It's got to be as good an experience, or at least close to as good an experience as they have in their home ballpark to go on the road for a neutral site. Right? I mean, Clemson, South Carolina, we've talked a lot about the way they do their 3-game deal. 1 game in Clemson, 1 game in Columbia, and then they play a game at a minor league park in Greenville. It's a great setup, floor field. Really nice setup.
Nice name drop. I mean, just nobody knows that.
You're welcome.
It's impressive.
Play games in downtown Charlotte at the minor league park there. Play games at the Durham Bulls home park in North Carolina.
Isn't the simpler answer to all of this, though, that the Braves and the people who own Trustmark Park need to put some money into bringing that park a little further along? That feels like the easier solution than trying to reschedule everything.
Well, and look, I'm not going to tell how other people how to spend their money because I do not know what the financial arrangement is. I don't know who owns that stadium. I don't know what percentage of tax revenue goes into maintenance. I don't know if the Braves themselves put money into it. My guess would be no. Whatever the local ownership group is, I don't know exactly what the setup is. Somebody brought up, surely for an event like this, there is event insurance to cover a rainout, a can't play, something happens. I don't know how you can put an event like that on without covering your own rear end with an insurance policy.
That's a good point, too. What would have happened if it just poured down rain last night and you couldn't play the game? Would they have done the same thing where you get 2 Braves tickets and you hadn't seen any baseball? I mean,
I don't know the answer to that.
This doesn't make any sense. Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that.
It feels like the whole "we're not going to refund you" is like deflecting blame away from the venue being why the game couldn't continue. And again, that wasn't Mike Bianco's decision. He wasn't afraid of a 1-run game in the 4th. That was the umpires in the 2nd inning saying, "Whoa, this doesn't look good."
Yeah, so they first called the coaches together in the 2nd inning, and then they did it again in the 4th inning and ultimately made the decision. But you're right. It wasn't Mike Bianco's decision. It wasn't Scott Berry's decision. Both head coaches were supportive of the decision, but once the game begins, it is the job of the umpiring crew then. They're the ones that have to make a call. It's the umpires who pull teams off the field for lightning. It's the umpires who decide when a game can't continue if it's raining and a tarp needs to go on the field. Once the game begins, game management becomes the responsibility of the umpiring crew. And so they're the ones that made the call. Somebody said it's called force majeure. It's on almost every ticket that you buy to any sporting event. It basically means that an act of God or unforeseeable incident that prevents the game from going forward. Yeah, that's not force majeure, actually. And I'm not trying to be like, well, actually, guy. Unplayable field conditions are not force majeure. A tornado, a hurricane, straight line winds, a torrential downpour. Those are force majeure things. A faulty sodding operation is not force majeure. That's human error.
Yeah. And we did get a couple people ask, and it's a fair question, why did they start the game at all if the field was so bad? Scott Berry explained it. He said basically you only take in you do pregame warm-ups on the dirt. That they could kind of see that something looked off in pregame, but because you don't do your, like he even said the ball was bouncing differently on the grass, but they didn't realize how bad it was until they actually started playing the game, because in pregame warm-ups, you don't play on the grass or around the bases like you do in the actual game, and they realized almost right away something's not right here, but they didn't realize that until after the game began.
And look, it's the infield playing surface that was redone. It wasn't the outfield. And so if you think about batting practice and how it works, they put a cover over half the infield between the home plate and pitcher's mound, so you're not on top of the grass. You're really not on top of the grass on the infield at all. It just happened. We'll be back.